Every one of these plastic model kits tells a story. Most involve courage, sacrifice, combat and daring do, commemorating the brave men that flew in them. But this little Airfix Defiant beats them all. Not only does it have all the usual stuff, it also has a homesick dog, an 80s pop legend, and also a flying pig. Be prepared for the full story of N3333.
N3333 was a 319th Defiant to roll off the Boulton Paul production line at Penderford near Wolverhampton. It was November 1940, the Battle of Britain had been won, and now the RAF was turning its attention to fighting the Germans at night, as the Luftwaffe bombers roamed freely over the English cities after dark. Several new squadrons were reformed for this purpose in the last week of November 1940, including 255 Squadron, which had been chosen to fly Boulton Paul Defiants out of Curtin-in-Lindsey in North Lincolnshire. This airfield was ideally placed to protect the heavily bombed port of Hull on the northeast coast of England. N3333 was one of the first batch of Defiants to be delivered to the squadron, which were all still painted in the day fighter colours, fresh from the factory. Shortly after its arrival, the aircraft was flown to Cranwell for a fighter leaders conference by Battle of Britain ace and acting CO, Flight Lieutenant Richard Truesdale. It was here that this famous photograph was taken, which directly led to it being chosen decades later by Airfix to be the subject of their model kit. By the end of December, 255 Squadron was operational, with 13 pilots, 28 gunners and about 150 ground staff. Amongst the pilots and gunners was a pair that had trained together at 55 OTU immediately before being posted to 255. Pilot Officer Arthur Alexander Ballantyne, inevitably known as Sandy thanks to his Scottish roots, and Sergeant Chris McTaggart teamed up straight away and flew their first 255 Squadron Defiant on the 27th of December 1940. The weather in early 1941 was very bad, so they flew training sorties when they could, and it wasn't until the 5th of February that they were scrambled on their first operational sortie, and even then they ended up having to land in a snowstorm. A closer look at Chris's logbook shows that by then the pair had adopted M3333 as their aircraft, possibly because of its code letter B for Ballantyne. It was now painted all black, of course, with flame-dampening exhausts and VHF radio fitted. Although February was a quiet month, they still had their adventures. On the 25th of February, Chris wrote in his logbook that during an interception patrol, he fired a round through the air screw. Now, many Defiant experts will tell you that that wasn't even possible, but Chris managed it. Around this time, Sandy and Chris decided to paint a flying pig on their aircraft. Maybe it was a reflection on the handling qualities of N3333 or something more affectionate. We'll never know. But now the Germans were not just facing Sandy and Chris, but also a shiny pink pig with wings. Finally, 2 weeks later, the pair were doing an air test in N3333 when a Heinkel 111 appeared out of the low cloud, flying across their path, heading west. Sandy immediately gave chase and soon gave Chris a great target to aim at by flying slightly behind and underneath the large wing of the German bomber. Chris used all of his gunnery training to good advantage and poured fire into the Heinkel's fuselage. After 2 more attacks, the Heinkel was seen to enter cloud badly damaged and unlikely to make it home. Sandy and Chris and the flying pig had finally proven themselves in combat. As winter turned to spring, Luftwaffe operations increased again. By May 1941, 255 crews were often flying 2 patrols in one night, as waves of German bombers headed for the northern towns of England. One such night was that of the 3rd and 4th of May 1941, when Sandy and Chris took off in the Flying Pig at 22:30 for a patrol over Sheffield and Liverpool. Chris noted that fires could be seen over 100 miles away as Liverpool was hit hard by nearly 300 German bombers, although they didn't manage to find any. They landed at 5 past midnight and were told to stand by to go up again as the raid continued. 2.5 hours later they took off again, although just to confuse historians, double British summertime had kicked in for the first time ever whilst they were on the ground, so now it was officially 0340. They headed south towards Lincoln, this time tasked with protecting bomber airfields from intruders. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out as planned, as after 10 minutes airborne, a stream of cannon shells suddenly hit M3333 out of the darkness. The engine caught fire and lost power, and being only at 4,000 feet, Sandy had no choice but to order Chris to bail out immediately. Luckily, Chris was wearing a specially designed parachute, which saved him valuable seconds by having his parachute already attached to him. With Chris gone, Sandy rolled the flying pig onto its back and bailed out at about 1,500 feet. Both men's parachutes opened just in time, and they survived with just a few cuts and bruises. N3333 was of course not so lucky. The flying pig dived vertically into the ground at Nocton Fen and buried itself deep into the rich Lincolnshire soil. Its bacon was well and truly cooked. In July 2018, the Wingleader team took part in a televised dig and recovery of N3333 from its last resting place at Nocton Fen. The landscape has changed enormously since 1941, and the entire area is now owned and farmed by famous British inventor Sir James Dyson. With his generous permission, the team set to work and soon found the main body of wreckage, including the well-preserved engine, still with the Rolls-Royce maker's name visible, 2 of the turret's 4 Browning machine guns, and even the complete tailwheel assembly. The twisted propeller assembly was also hauled out of the hole, along with many other interesting bits and pieces. Being a televised dig, the producers were very keen to trace relatives of Sandy or Chris to appear on the programme. There was very little information available on either of them at that time, especially Chris McTaggart, who seemed to have disappeared without trace after the war. However, a breakthrough was finally made when Sandy's daughter, Christine Ballantyne, was traced as being a breeder of Pekingese dogs who used to live in the same English village as Sandy did after serving with 255 Squadron. The only slag was she was now living in Canada. Generously, Christine agreed to fly over and take part in the dig, and she became an integral part of the programme, chatting to the presenter, 80s pop icon Suggs, about her father, and standing with the team as her father's aircraft saw daylight again for the first time in nearly 80 years. That evening, as Christine and the team went through her family documents of memorabilia, they finally pieced together the full story of what happened to Chris and Sandy after that fateful night over Nocton Fen. Just 3 days after their narrow escape, Chris and Sandy were airborne again and ready to fight. They even received a new YDB N1740, which they flew as often as it was serviceable. This rare photo is believed to show M1740, proudly christened as the new Flying Pig, complete with parachute. Their airborne partnership lasted until the end of June 1941, when 255 Squadrons started to convert to Beaufighters, which needed an AI operator rather than a gunner. Chris chose to remain as a specialist air gunner and was transferred to the Canadian 409th Squadron at Digby. Chris's flying career then followed the career of his beloved Defiant. His next posting was to 264 Squadron, which was one of the last still flying the Defiant as a night fighter, using the improved Mark II with the AI radar on board. When 264 traded his Defiance for the much improved Mosquito, Chris again elected to follow the Defiants as they were given to BA-coded 277 Squadron for air-sea rescue duties. After 5 months of that, Chris was then posted to 287 Squadron, one of the few units still flying the Defiant at that point as target tugs. In May 1943, the Defiant gained a new lease of life in the electronic countermeasures role with 515 Squadron. Chris, of course, was there like a shot and flew with the squadron until it converted to Beaufighters in late 1943.
So Chris was a Defiant specialist who'd served the RAF with distinction, only to suddenly disappear from records. Why? Well, Christine gave us the breakthrough we'd been looking for.
Quite simply, Chrysostom Herbert Macpherson Gardner MacTaggart, yes, that was his full name, had adopted the surname of his Danish grandfather and become Chris Madsen after the war, even spending a few years in Copenhagen whilst gaining his pilot's license. He then emigrated to Canada and flew with the Canadian Air Force for a few years, before settling down as a bush pilot in the northern wilderness. It was in this period when he contacted Christine out of the blue, and she learned his story and took this wonderful photo of her father's old friend. He made it very clear that Sandy had saved his life that night over Nocton Fen. Chris lived a simple life in his final years with very few possessions, and gave most of his money to support a local cat shelter. He passed away quietly and almost unnoticed in March 2012 in Vancouver. After Chris left 255 Squadron, Sandy converted onto the new Beaufighter Mark II and was promoted to a flying officer on the 7th of September 1941. However, what should have been an exciting time for the 255 Squadron crews was marred by a series of fatal accidents. The man in engine Mark II was fatally underpowered and was also prone to engine failure, a deadly combination. In early 1942, Sandy had to take a few days' medical leave for a routine sinus operation. Tragically, the RAF surgeon made a terrible mistake and cut Sandy's optic nerve, instantly blinding him in his right eye and ending his operational flying career. Despite this setback, Sandy remained in the RAF and retrained as a GCI radar controller at RAF Meatishead in Norfolk. Part of this once top-secret base is now open to the public, so Mark paid a visit to find out exactly what Sandy did there.
The GCI controllers at Neatishead used their radar equipment to guide night fighter pilots from nearby Coltishall towards incoming German bombers. Sandy's experience as a night fighter pilot was clearly very useful in this type of job. As ground controller, Sandy would stand behind these two operators and use the PPI to get the bearing of the aircraft and the height finder to get the altitude. The information gathered from the radar screens was displayed on plotting tables like this one. This gave all the controllers a clear view of what was going on in their area at any one time.
In April 1942, he got married to Peggy and settled down in a beautiful little cottage in Horning, just a short distance from his base at RAF Meatishead in the Norfolk Broads. They adopted the X-255 Squadron mascot Bruce, the dog who had famously tried to walk back to Coltishall after his squadron moved to Shropshire. And their daughter Christine was born in October 1943. They had an idyllic life ahead of them. But the war hadn't finished with Sandy just yet. In the planning for D-Day, experienced GCI controllers were needed to be on standby to set up mobile GCI stations in France as soon as the beaches were secured. Sandy was not detailed to go, but his name was in the reinforcement pool, along with many others. On the 1st of June, just 5 days before the invasion, there was a motorcycle accident at Marshalling Camp R8 at Cuddenham, near Ipswich. This secret 483 Group Operations Record Book records the incident and notes that Flight Lieutenant A.A. Ballantyne and Flight Lieutenant J.N. Banks were posted from AEAF Reinforcement Pool as replacements. Sandy had to go immediately. He packed his things, kissed his wife and daughter goodbye, and headed back to the front line. He landed on Gold Beach on the afternoon of 6th of June 1944, and his team set to work creating a mobile GCI station at Bassenville Airfield, just 2 miles inland. It must have been very hard for him to leave the tranquility of the Norfolk Broads and his young family to land on the chaos and carnage of a D-Day beach that day. Nevertheless, Sandy did his job and had the GCI station up and running within days. 10 days later, the GCI personnel dug themselves slit trenches to sleep in, as the nightly German raids made buildings unsafe. Sandy remarked to his friend Bill Findlay that he was a lot more frightened on the ground in France than he had ever been when flying night fighters. That night, German bombers dropped anti-personnel bombs on the airfield, one of which rolled towards Sandy's trench and exploded, burying him. He was dug out alive, but his internal injuries were so severe that he died 2 days later at the age of just 24.
Sandy never came back to this beautiful cottage. Like so many of his generation, he gave his life so that we could enjoy the lifestyle that he had so enjoyed. We should never forget that.